I'd like to welcome everybody. My name is Rebecca Apple, and I'm Senior Manager of Programs for the American Medical Student Association. We are thrilled today to have with us Dr. Alan Peterkin. He's going to be sharing his information on staying human during residency, 10 tips for resilience. He has written a book, which edition is coming out, Dr. Peterkin?
Sixth.
The sixth edition. And we are absolutely thrilled to be able to have him with us sharing his insight. We're very appreciative of him taking the time to meet with everybody. Brief background, Dr. Peterkin studied English and French literature before starting medical school at the University of Manitoba. He completed residencies in family medicine and psychiatry at McGill, is the author of 10 books for adults and children, including textbooks on physician well-being and on the medical care of sexual minorities. I'd like to share just some basic information, if I could, before we get started. Please do remember that this webinar will be recorded and is available for download. If you have any questions, I encourage you to use the chat function in WebEx, and make sure your phones are on mute, although I have muted everybody at this point, but make sure your phones remain on mute to minimize background noise. And now, with no further ado, I would like to introduce Dr. Alan Peterkin.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. It's really a pleasure to be with you all. And I've worked with AMSA for a number of years in various capacities. I've spoken at your conferences. I've done other webinars on narrative medicine and on medical humanities. But tonight I'll be talking about a subject very close to my heart, which is resident health and well-being and resilience. So this is the cover of the new edition of Staying Human During Residency Training. So I wanted to tell people that I wrote the very first edition when I was a resident. As Rebecca mentioned, I completed residencies in psychiatry and family medicine at McGill University of Montreal, and at the end of my residency, I was sort of looking back and sort of thinking, what happened? What happened to me? What was this experience? How can I make sense of it? What were the pitfalls? What were the kind of victories and wonderful experiences? And I actually got permission to write this book as an elective, and I'd like to give that an example of ask and ye shall receive. No one had ever done a writing elective in my residency program, but when I presented them with this proposal, they said yes. So I keep that in mind, that you can ask for creative and original things in your residency, and if you can make a good case, they'll likely be approved. So I'd like to start my talk with a little story from Greek mythology. As you'll hear through the talk, I'm a great proponent of narrative medicine and storytelling. So let me tell you about Procrustes from Greek mythology. Procrustes was a thief and murderer who actually was an innkeeper on the road to Athens. So young people seeking their fortune in Athens would need a place to stay, and they would stop at Procrustes' Inn, of course, not really knowing who he was and what he was up to. And this illustrates the Procrustean bed, because what he would do is guests of his hotel would be in his bed, and if they were too long, he would cut off their limbs, and if they were too short for the bed, he would elongate them and stretch them on a rack. So in some ways, I think of residency training as a Procrustean journey, in that, young people, our listeners will be some of them entering residency in July, some of the med students sort of imagining residency, but, on the road to success and to a satisfying career. But I always like to remind people that you don't want to have vital parts of yourself cut off. Your creative part, your athletic part, your artistic part, your interest in social justice, whatever brought you to medicine, you want to make sure that those parts of you don't get, stretched out of proportion or completely cut off. And I begin the talk with some sort of bad news, which is sort of our risks as medical trainees. There was just a recent meta-analysis looking at 54 studies from 1963 to the present, and it was revealed that 29% of residents met criteria for a depressive episode, manifesting symptoms of depression. 46.4 to 96.5% of residents reported some kind of abuse during their training, be it verbal, physical, or even inappropriate sexual behavior on the part of colleagues and supervisors. Doctors under 40 have 3 times the suicide rate of people who aren't physicians. 37 to 40% of residents report problems with their spouse or lover or family life during training. So there are stressors, and when I first wrote the book, the only thing we talked about was physician impairment. And what I'm really happy to report is that nowadays what we're really talking about is wellness, resilience, and even what constitutes physician happiness, and I'll be talking more about that. So don't let those statistics put you off. Just think of them as sort of a bit of a warning or an ounce of prevention that we are at risk because of the stresses of the work. We come to medicine with certain personality characteristics. You know, some of us are obsessional, some of us are perfectionists, some of us are very competitive, and these are the very skills that can lead to our success, but they can also isolate us, so putting us at risk for some of these things I've mentioned. But let's flag the notion of resilience and physician happiness, and then we'll get into a discussion of what that actually looks like. So I'm going to move into the 10 tips. For each edition of the book, I reviewed the literature on trainee health, resident health, and was able to sort of update with each edition what's important and what the key trends are. So the first most important tip that I can give you is to try and maintain an internal locus of control. And what that means is taking charge of your learning, not being sort of a passive recipient or feeling helpless in the face of a very elaborate training program. Be creative. I mentioned that I completed residencies in both psychiatry and family medicine. I actually ended up asking for a joint program during that residency, and it didn't exist, but they allowed me to do it. It was very important to me to do both of those programs at the time. So don't be afraid to ask for what you need in your learning. And I think that can include things like, being aware of holidays, putting in requests for holiday leave well in advance, so you always have something to look forward to. Do homework and find out, who are the best supervisors, what's the best rotation, what's the best time to do a particular rotation. Make really good use of your electives. Plan these in advance. Make sure that they too are something that you look forward to. And an example I give for my own training is, in the family medicine part of my training, I knew that I was not really interested in doing surgical procedures, apart from just very minor office procedures. I knew that was not a forte, it was not an interest. So what I did actually is I asked to do one of my surgical rotations over Christmas holiday because I knew they closed beds and it was less busy. And that, some people will think, well, what was he doing there? But I think that was me just saying, I know what my strengths are, I know what my interests are, and I'm actually going to pick an optimal time for me to do a particular rotation. The next most important thing that you can do is seek support. As I mentioned, many trainees are competitive. We're taught to be very stoical, to not complain, to be self-sufficient, self-starters. But again, that can lead to real isolation. And I think what you want to do is look out for each other. One of the programs that I've worked with has something they call Neighborhood Watch, which is similar to, you'd be familiar with that program that in a neighborhood, parents will put a sign in the window saying Neighborhood Watch, meaning that they're on the lookout for the kids in the neighborhood and that that's a safe place to go. And the idea that we look out for each other, as trainees, that we look out for our students who are under us. I think the degree to which we take care of ourselves during training really helps determine what kind of doctors we become. And it's never been easier to keep in touch with people. I hear residents saying, I've lost my friends outside of medicine. I don't get to visit my folks much. In some ways, it's never been easier to keep in touch with people, with Twitter and email and Skype and texting. And sometimes all you need to do to keep that connection going is to just let people know you're thinking about them and that you're planning to connect with them in some kind of real way. The other people to look out for would be the folks in your post-grad medical office who will let you know what kind of resources there are for support. Do they have retreats? Do they have workshops? I'm a big proponent of finding a mentor during training, and a mentor is somebody who shares your interests and your passions for a particular aspect of medicine. But in some ways, I think they should embody a life that you admire, a life in balance, a life of relationship, a life of real commitment to the profession. So you look for somebody who's not only a competent educator, but someone who sort of is a role model for yourself. And, of course, someone who isn't evaluating, I think, you in any way. I think it's important to find a mentor who doesn't have to grade you. That allows for really honest dialogue. Keep in mind that there are other people in your hospital, who aren't physicians, who aren't other residents, that can be a good source of support. You're dealing with nurses and orderlies, people in the cafeteria. It's all about relationship when you're there. Don't get too sort of self-absorbed. Try and form these links because they really make for a wonderful experience. Keep in mind that your hospital will likely have a chaplain or chaplains from multiple religious denominations if you want to speak to them, that you'll have a bioethicist as well if you want to talk about difficult cases. So think of support quite broadly. The next thing is kind of a practical tip that I suggest people do. And again, this applies to students as well as residents and even fellows, far into their training. I suggest that people draw a self-esteem pie for themselves with 4 components. So work is obviously the work of medicine, the work of being a resident. Play is what you love. So it could be athletics, it could be cooking, it could be anything that really brings you pleasure outside of medicine. Love stands for all the relationships you have, collegial, romantic, personal, family, you may be a parent. And then spirit is broadly defined. It could be your religious beliefs, it could be your values, it could be your sense of social justice, how you make meaning in your life. So I think those are the 4 components that make for a life. And I'm not suggesting that all 4 should be equal. I remember I worked once with an elite athlete. So play actually was 3/4 of his pie, and that's what made sense for him. So what I encourage you to do is draw a pie of where you'd like to be. Where do those quadrants fit for you? Which is more important? What constitutes the balance of these elements for you? And then put it on your fridge, as kind of a reminder. I don't want to neglect relationships. I don't want to neglect my sense of play. I don't want to neglect what I believe in. And then, twice a year, sit down and draw the pie of where you're actually at, just as a visual reminder. And then, remind yourself, I want to get back to that pie that I think best represents who I am and who I want to be. This seems like an obvious one, don't neglect the body, but I think as part of the stoicism of medical training, we kind of get into some kind of magical thinking that we ourselves don't have bodies, we ourselves don't get sick, won't get sick. We ignore cues about hunger, about thirst, about fatigue, even having to go to the bathroom, in the name of getting the job done. And I think that really isn't good for us. The other thing I notice is that many trainees don't have their own family doctor or general practitioner. And I think that's important to line up before you start your training. And often your post-grad office can help you find people who are taking new patients. And that's just, acknowledging that if you do get sick or you need time off or you need a note or you need, antibiotics or whatever the case may be, that you have somebody who's going to look after you. I think you want to pay special attention to diet. I remember, that we all got into caffeine, we got into the vending machines and, a lot of junk food and sweets because we were rushed. But, plan, bring stuff from home. Have 5 small meals during your day rather than big meals, and keep healthy snacks like, yogurt and nuts and fruit, etc., to kind of keep yourself fueled. Pay attention to sleep rituals. The big complaint that we all have during training, even with new restrictions on how many hours residents work in the U.S. and Canada, that, the whole thing really does still disrupt our sleep. So find yourself a routine and a ritual that works for you. And I think what's really important is when you get home after your shift, disconnect your phone, your email. Don't, subject yourself to light that's going to interrupt your melatonin production and your sleep cycles. Don't do things that are going to keep your mind active. Don't obsessively check those results. You should have signed those over to your colleague before you left. So really look after sleep and try and find a way to get some exercise in. Be it, walking part of the way to work, cycling, finding out where the closest gym is. Many hospital facilities have gyms you can use, have swimming pools you can use. So keeping in mind that you really want to build that in, you need to look after your health if you're going to look after other people. The next thing is, of course, the pressure to learn during busy work days, busy night calls. And, residents tell me, I promised myself I was going to read on the weekend or I was going to read after supper tonight. And the reality is you're tired, and you probably should be doing other things on your weekends and your evenings, like maintaining your relationship. So the best strategy is really reading around your cases. And there again, when I was a resident, we used to have very heavy pockets, laden with those spiral manuals, etc. Now, of course, you've got apps. It's never been easier to access medical information, protocols, treatment guidelines. Many of your residency programs or the hospital where you're trained will have free apps rather you can sign up. Your library can line you up with certain apps. So decide that you're going to read around the cases that you're working with during the day. That's the real incentive. There are things you need to learn. And in fact, you're more likely to remember that kind of information and knowledge when it is in a context of a real case. So that really does optimize your learning. The next thing is to know your rights. I talk to residents all the time. I give workshops, in Canada, the U.S., even Europe. And I find out that most residents haven't read their contract or their collective agreement. They haven't really looked at it carefully. They don't know what their rights are. They don't know what benefits there are in terms of accommodations, parental leaves they might be entitled to, again, workshops that might be available, aspects of safety. I think pretty much all residency programs now have protocols around harassment and discrimination with actual procedures on how you should deal with these things. So have a good look at your contract. Often, again, your post-grad office will either give you a little manual or will direct you to a website. Have a really good look and know your rights. Part of being assertive, part of having an internal locus of control is actually knowing what your rights are. The next thing is about keeping a journal. I remember when I was a resident, the really important steps when you enter residency, your first death, your first delivery you do on your own, the first time you alone deliver bad news or deliver really good news. These are all the milestones of being a doctor. And, we all think we'll remember them, but the point is you don't remember the great detail. I remember I wrote a poem about the first patient of mine that died. But, that takes a bit of time and commitment. And so I think, keep a journal. It could just be a couple of notes in your agenda or in your phone, or you could even video record yourself on your phone, with some thoughts. But keep track of these things because, again, these are the milestones that matter so much in your becoming a full-fledged, autonomous physician. Some residency programs will have reflective portfolios, but most don't. So you may need to do this yourself. Just remind yourself and just make a few little notes so that you'll remember these things. And I think something else you can request, I mentioned narrative medicine before, and as many of you know, that phrase in the U.S. was coined by Dr. Rita Sharon out of Columbia University, and she looks at the role of reflective writing in identity formation and in becoming a professional, maintaining professionalism, but also, reading poetry, short fiction, short pieces of memoir, to get you reflecting about taking care of others, taking care of yourself, what it means to be a doctor in the 21st century. I head up a program in medical humanities at the University of Toronto, and what we really emphasize are particular aspects of being a doctor that every doctor, whatever your specialty choice, should possess and embody. So I'm talking about reflective capacity, the ability to stand back, to look at the meaning of your work, critical thinking, the ability to ask, where does this information come from? How was this information constructed? Does it leave people out? So the idea of feeling free to question some of the things that you're taught. Is social justice embodied in some of the content that you're given? Narrative competence is the ability to work with stories, to listen to stories, receive stories, respect stories, and then to construct stories with your patients and your colleagues over time. It's always iterative. It's a process that storytelling is something that you can become good at. We also talk about visual literacy, and we do workshops with looking at paintings, looking at films, learning to pay attention, because we know that learning how to read a painting actually helps with diagnostic acumen, that you're learning how to look at detail, to read non-visual cues in your patients, and that is vital information as well. And then we like to link all of these aspects that the humanities can teach us and keeping a journal can teach us, in that reflective practitioners have been shown to take better care of their patients, but they also take better care of themselves, and that's really important as well. This is about being a teacher. Watch one, do one, teach one is the motto of medical training from med school right through to residency, fellowship, and beyond. But the idea that there's always somebody junior to you, pretty much, and that you want to look out for them, that you want to be patient, that you want to be generous, that you look out for each other. And I think you all would have noticed that your best teachers, your best supervisors and professors were also the best doctors. They were the most humane, the most accessible, probably the kindest. And I always tell people you can't turn it off and on. You can't be a cruel or ruthless or critical teacher and then suddenly turn on the charm with your patients. I think you want to be humanistic in all of your relationships. And keep in mind, if you become kind of a hardened, cynical resident, you're going to bring that home to your partner, your children, your family, your friends. So the idea of cultivating generosity and patience as a human being in the context of your medical training. This is part of course, being assertive and knowing your rights is not being afraid to say no, or I'm not comfortable with this. One of the biggest stressors is being given responsibilities that you're not prepared for and trying to suck it up, be stoical, carry it off. But that's really not good for you, and it may be dangerous for your patients. So ask for what you need. Don't be afraid to say no to something that's unreasonable. What I find when I get residents and med students doing reflective writing is most often they write about times where they've been silenced, where they witnessed something unprofessional, they witnessed something harsh or unempathic, and they were lost for words. They couldn't stand up to the preceptor or to the superior out of fear or fear of being judged or failed on the rotation. So the idea that when you are silenced or feel silenced, pay attention to that. And always ask yourself, okay, I couldn't say no this time, but what am I going to say the next time? What can I rehearse to maintain my integrity, to say no to things that are unreasonable, and to ask for things that I need in my learning and in the part of providing competent, safe care. And then the last one is to live mindfully with pleasure and purpose. Now, we all know that mindfulness is something that has swept our culture in every profession. Lawyers are learning mindfulness, pilots, nurses, everybody, this aspect of being present to your experience, not to your thoughts, your feelings, your bodily sensations, and not just tuning out in the name of getting the job done. So the idea of being mindful, and there are courses, many residency programs will have workshops on this, but checking in with yourself once or twice a day about, again, what am I thinking, what am I feeling, what is my body telling me, and what do I want to have happen. The pleasure and purpose part of this slide, the 2 Ps I call it, comes from, I talked earlier about what constitutes happiness for people and happiness for physicians. So one of the researchers, a psychologist who's looked a lot at human happiness, is a guy called Seligman. And the 2 main things that determine happiness, it's not how much money you make, it's not that you've moved to a better climate. A lot of residents think I'll be happier if I move, to Florida or someplace else. That's not what it's about. The studies don't show that it's about geography or beyond having your needs met, high levels of income. It's having a sense of pleasure and purpose in what you do, so that you experience joy, even when it's difficult, that this is something that brings meaning and purpose to your life. The purpose aspect is very important, that you don't feel detached from your work, burnt out. The literature shows that residents become cynical after second year, that levels of cynicism mount, that you're constantly asking yourself, what, and this can be part of your pie chart that I mentioned earlier. What brings me pleasure? What is my sense of play? And what brings me a sense of purpose? And this means honoring your own personal values, checking in with your sense of professionalism, what it means to be a doctor, and aiming to be a humanistic healthcare provider, whatever your level of training. So those are basically the slides tips I have for resilience and well-being during training. As I mentioned, it's geared towards residents, and the new edition of my book talks a lot about these points in more detail. Numerous tips on not just surviving residency, but actually thriving as a human being. And there are lots of quotes and stories from residents themselves that I think will help you with the process. So, Rebecca, happy to take any questions now.
Super. Well, I want to say thank you for these wonderful insights, and I want to remind everybody that what they can do is use that chat function on the right bottom half of the screen to send in questions, but understanding that sometimes people are shy. Dr. Peterkin, I did want to ask you if we could go back to when you were talking about seeking support.
Yeah.
Something that I hear a lot, and you also mentioned if I could just go to Florida. So if you find yourself committing to a residency, you really love the program, it's exactly what you want to do, but you're no longer close to everybody you were physically close to before, where do you go to find that support? You know, you're consumed with work and learning, and you're tired, and how are you then supposed to also go out and create a new support system? What are your recommendations for that?
Well, that's right. You know, many residents relocate, and many single residents relocate, and it's tricky to set up, you know, kind of a new social life. But I would go to what do you love, and it might be that you really like working out and going to the gym. So going to a gym might allow you to meet new people. Some people will belong to religious communities or social justice groups, and finding, you know, local community that way, and you know, attending meetings, finding out about journal clubs and family clubs that many programs now have. You know, in our Health Humanities program, we have a lot of offerings like, you know, film nights and lunch and learns and literary readings with famous authors. So, you know, get plugged into the school where you're at, the hospital where you're at, and what kind of events come your way, because that's a way of you know, meeting people in the context of talking about things that you're really passionate about.
That's great. I want to also, if I can, follow up on what you were talking about in terms of learning to say no. And if I could get you to put the psychiatrist cap on for a moment and share with us some strategies for people to be able to feel comfortable saying no, ways that they can tell themselves, you know, it's okay to work up the courage and to say no, because that's not always everyone's inclination to begin with. And then when you compound that with the hierarchy, it can be very uncomfortable.
Well, I always say to all the people, all the students I work with, students, residents, fellows, grad students, I always say, ask yourself, where's the power? Part of knowing what to do is kind of identifying what the hierarchy is, what the power relationship is in the person or group that you're interacting with. I think the other important thing is to, as part of being mindful, is listening to your body. You know, are you getting tense? Is your heart rate racing? Are you sweating in the presence of this person? You know, do you find you worry in advance of meeting with them? So really being mindful about your reaction to particular colleagues and supervisors and attending staff, you know, staff people, and saying, okay, I may have a problem with this person. I would say talk to your friends and to other residents, of people that you can confide in, who will keep your confidence about things that they've tried with maybe even that same preceptor, what's worked. You know, paying attention to those times where you are silenced, where you couldn't muster the courage, and saying to yourself, okay, I'm going to replay this scenario, or I'm even going to write about it. I'm going to write a little scenario, and what could I have said? You know, could I have said anything? And then I think the other thing to do also, in terms of if you do encounter any bullying, harassment, that you do talk to your post-grad office, because there are mechanisms for assisting you with that, and at times, you know, actually interacting with the problematic person, so that they become more sensitive to the needs of the people they're supervising. So I think those are some thoughts. But you know, the other thing too is if you're asked, you're put on the spot, you can say, give me a couple minutes, I need to get back to you. You know, you're on the phone with the chief resident, and he's you know, on you about something, just say, look, can I have a couple minutes? I'll call you right back, Buy yourself some time, or say, let me get back to you. If you can't say an outright no, say, I'm not sure I'm comfortable with that particular request. I think I'm going to need a little help, and then try and be specific with what you need, So those are some thoughts. You're absolutely right. The medical training has been compared to the military with its rank and power relationships. But I think this is a skill that you can also develop. You can just set it as a goal. I want to be mindful of what I need and what I feel, and translate that into what I ask for.
The next question that we just received via chat, it dovetails so nicely into what you were just saying. There's a concern sometimes to honestly interact with other residents and with those quote-unquote above them because of the concern that everybody's grading you. The student says, we've always heard that everyone is grading you, from the unit secretaries to the residents on up. So how can you find someone to bounce ideas off of, to ask questions of, without feeling as though you're being evaluated constantly?
So I think, we all know who's the resident in my program, or the person in my rotation just now that I kind of take to, that seems like somebody I can trust. My mentor. Who's my mentor, and who can I run ideas by? And then I think sometimes it takes, somebody being courageous in a group and saying, look, oh my gosh, I really struggle with that. Or, that was a really difficult code, or I'm still reeling from the fact that we lost that patient. That you're kind of putting it out there that these are concerns we all have. These are universal concerns that every trainee has. And a lot of people pretend not to have them because I've got to show I'm smart, I'm competent, I'm self-sufficient. But if you help create a culture where, we can talk about certain things. We can talk about what was difficult. We can talk about medical error. Because we know that medical error, I think there was a study just saying it's either the second, third killer of patients, after cancer. Kind of a permissiveness that these are things that we can talk about. And that isn't a sign of weakness or lack of knowledge. That's a sign of being really conscientious, being collaborative, and being a real learner.
I think that's very helpful. I think, while I listen to you talk and saying we know this and it's okay to be more open, a lot of the medical students I talk to, they are starting out the process with fear. So I would love it if you could talk about, getting into the mindset that you're not just going to survive, but you're going to thrive before you are even there.
Yeah, well, I always joke. I keep reminding trainees, look, you're never going to be this young. You're never going to be this good looking. You're never going to be this healthy again. You don't want to, squander those years. You're a young person with developmental imperatives, leaving your family of origin, finding a mate, coming out if you're gay, having children if that's what you want to do. I remind female residents about the falling fertility curve and don't postpone having children too long. So the idea that, you have the developmental imperatives that everybody your age has, and you really don't want to neglect them. So ask yourself, okay, yeah, I'm scared, and medical students are scared. It's there's too much information, too little time, a lot of evaluation, some judgment. But just saying, how can I be mindful of my experience? Where is my sense of pleasure and purpose right now? What is that pie chart looking like? just reminders, and then saying, okay, well, I really need to work on this. I need to, get back to swimming because that's how I used to handle my stress in pre-med, I need to maybe form a support group for med students or a journal club where we talk not just about hard knowledge but about process and how we learn. So that, the fear is natural, but to remind yourself, you're obviously very motivated, very intelligent. That's how you got this far. But you're not superhuman. And again, internal locus of control and support are the two most important things for countering that sense of fear and helplessness at times.
It sounds to me that really the important thing is connectedness. Staying connected to your physical self, your spiritual self, if you will, your mental self, and the things and the people who matter to you.
If we were to sum up, Rebecca, the whole talk, that would be, you just said it perfectly. It really is staying connected to yourself, your values, your beliefs, your sense of vocation, your aspirations, connected to your community, connected to not just your learning community, but your larger community, that what is your sense of social justice and connectedness to the people that you live with. So asking yourself, what is my role as a resident, as a physician? What am I about? What is my profession about? And to repeatedly ask these questions throughout, because some things change, but some things remain a constant. We talked about, making sure you keep in touch with your non-medical friends, working on your relationship with your spouse or your partner. Some residents will have children, and, I didn't have a slide for this, but, when you come home and just sitting down and just sitting with them for 5-10 minutes without doing anything, just being present, sending them, an email or a text when you're on call, just, the idea of letting people know that you're thinking about them, your kids, your parents. The irony is that it's never been easier to stay connected with other people, but sometimes social media actually take us away from the whole reason that we're using social media.
Well, I think this has been very helpful, and up on the screen we do see www.drpeterkin.com. Is there a way, if our participants wanted to reach out to you in the future, is there like a contact form on that website?
There is.
Would you welcome that?
Yeah, I certainly would. So the website, it's not completely final, but it's certainly functional, and it shows. I've written a number of books. So there's, of course, Staying Human. I wrote a textbook with Dr. Kathy Risen on care of sexual minorities. I have a book called Portfolio to Go, 1,000 Writing Prompts and Provocations for Clinical Learners to kind of get yourself reflecting and writing. Another book with Kent State Press called Keeping Reflection Fresh, how you can, really work on that. So those are certainly projects. People can write to me about that. I certainly, take requests to do talks and so forth. I also have another book coming out that I'm going to talk to you more about, Rebecca, but it's going to be a book of graphic medicine comics about becoming a doctor. And that, we're going to do a worldwide call asking people to do their own drawings, to draw their own comics and cartoons about pre-med, med school, residency, being a young staff member, about, again, looking at this very strong acculturation process of how we become physicians and what happens to us. And so on the same website, there's a call for submissions to that. So, certainly would welcome to hear from your membership. As I say, I'm deeply committed to AMSA. I've worked with you all for many years and hope to continue to do so. Well,
thank you so very much, Dr. Peterkin, and thanks to everyone who dialed in. This webinar will be available for download, and we're also probably going to pull some snippets of it for use in a podcast. I want to wish everybody a lovely evening, and we'll see you all soon.